Good morning, everyone. Today, I have the great pleasure of speaking with Chelsea Peddle, owner and founder of CircleSpace. And Chelsea is here to tell us all about CircleSpace and what she does with her business. So, welcome to the show, Chelsea.
Thanks, Adrian. Happy to be here.
Very happy to have you. So, why don't we launch right into it? CircleSpace. Tell us about it. Why the name? What sort of work? What sort of work do you do with CircleSpace?
Sure. CircleSpace is all about empowering end of life planning. So it's my mission to help people prepare for end of life so that they can live in peace. So in my work, I offer a number of different services around end of life and illness and grief. Probably the one that people are most familiar with is end of life planning or advanced care planning. And so that's helping people to explore some of their values and their beliefs around illness and dying and death. And then I help them translate those into wishes for their future medical care. And so this is something that a lot of folks do. Typically, it's, boomers are thinking about their future and what they want their end of life to be. And so writing down their medical wishes is really important, especially for a time when they couldn't make decisions for themselves. It's really important to have a record or to have had a conversation with people who could help make those decisions for you. So they're grounded in what you want, so you get the care that you want. One of the things that I think really sets CircleSpace apart from other folks that are doing this kind of end-of-life advanced care planning is that I really like to focus on integrating comfort wishes into the advanced care planning process. So often we get really fixated on our medical wishes, like what specific circumstances would we want CPR or not want CPR, or intubation, or dialysis. But we often forget that we actually have to live as we are dying. And so by paying attention to comfort planning, this really helps us to think about, like, what are the physical and emotional and spiritual ways that we can bring ourselves comfort, and also the loved ones that are around us comfort, maybe even joy, through this really important part of our lives, the dying part of our lives, through illness and death. And I think paying attention to comfort is not only a gift to yourself, when your future self, when you are dying or when you're ill, but also to the people around you, your loved ones, who so often just flounder. We often don't know what to do or how to help people when we're witnessing their suffering or witnessing their illness or dying process. So preparing comfort wishes along with your advanced medical wishes, it's like giving your loved ones an instruction manual for how they can help, which is just such a tremendous gift.
I really like that you said that. I hadn't even thought of that. And as you're speaking, I'm sort of putting myself in that place. And at my point in that life, sort of at my point in life, where this becomes sort of something to really start seriously considering, or for an aging family member. So yes, an instruction manual, because as you mentioned, I think, and not verbatim, but sort of a family or close friends, or those who are our loved ones, as the person is sort of on their quote unquote deathbed. It maybe they are distraught. It's an emotionally distressing time, and sort of wondering about what sort of comforts that person might want, like a certain kind of music or a certain kind of fragrance or a certain kind of view from the room. I mean, that might sort of really be put on the back burner, or something that might not be considered.
That's it. Absolutely. I mean, you've named some really key things, like how do we adapt our environment so that it feels more comfortable for us? Because, we know that it's an incredibly stressful time for the person who is sick and for loved ones. And it feels like time is running out when you're actually in that scenario. And so, the ICU or the ER is not a place to be making these decisions about the medical care that you want. Like, you need to have thought about what you want before, not to be thinking about it for the first time when you're in crisis. And we know that families, they need to connect during this time. They really long for that sense of connection, and we don't often think about it very much. And so taking the time to have those conversations beforehand, like really asking, like, what do you want? How can I help? What may make you feel better if you are in discomfort, is a way to like really bond families now. That's why I say, like, my mission is to help people prepare for the future so they can live in peace. It's not just something that you're going to get benefit from when you're dying. It's something that you're going to get benefit from right now.
Yeah, it sounds like it's almost like having a will, something that sort
Yeah.
of at the time, I mean, obviously, you're not able to speak for yourself at that point and your wishes, but like just the peace of mind that comes from having a will and having all that squared away before that instance arises. So now you have me feeling sort of anxious. I hadn't really considered this, but I'm 34 years old, so hopefully a while to go yet before this is a serious consideration. But I mean, I think maybe I'm starting to think maybe it's never too late. Just as we should all have a will, maybe we should all have an end of life plan. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Like, I kind of think, like, when you get your driver's license when you're like 18, like, you should be offered supports for creating your end of life plan at that point, because that's legally when you can create like advanced directives, like some of the legal documents that you can use to enable some of your medical wishes.
Right.
That's when you're in BC, that's when you're allowed to start creating those documents. So we never know when illness or death is going to come. We know that young people die and get sick as well. And especially in this pandemic, I think that that has really prompted people to think about the reality of their mortality, that this is something that can visit any family, it can visit anyone at any time. And because of the nature of the pandemic, we're hearing these just absolutely tragic and heart-wrenching stories of loved ones driving their person to the hospital, dropping them at the doors of the ER, and leaving them there. They're not able to go in and be with that person as they're getting their care and treatment. And sometimes that's the last time they see their person. So having thought through what your wishes are and having a written record of it, so there's something that can speak for you if you can't speak for yourself when you're alone in the hospital, is really, really vital, especially now in this pandemic.
That is a great point. And even for those folks, I was thinking, just to add to your point, that, they might not be thinking directly about the pandemic or COVID sort of for themselves. The environment that the pandemic has created for our hospitals is such that, for instance, my 91-year-old grandfather in Nanaimo was recently hospitalized with a non-COVID related issue, and my aunt and my mom weren't allowed to be with him. And so he was, like, in a hallway, I understand, for some time and stuff, on a gurney. And so just so even, like, because as you were speaking, I was thinking, well, yes, we've heard these tragic stories of where families can't be with their loved ones who are dying of COVID, right, for obvious reasons, but even sort of non-COVID issues, just because of the threat of COVID, you can't even be in a hospital sometimes for a non-COVID issue with your loved one. So
absolutely. And that's where, like, for even just non-life threatening reasons for going to the hospital, like your grandfather, that's where having comfort wishes written down is really important, because the people that are caring for you are nurses and palliative care volunteers and physicians, and they don't know you. And so I've heard stories of loved ones going in for their one visit with the person in hospital and writing letters to their loved one's care team, like explaining who their loved one is, what's important to them,
right.
How to take care of them, because that's their one shot at it. So having that prepared, something that you can hand to your nurse and be like, this is who I am, this is what's important to me, just increases the quality of your care. And I know that that staff and physicians and nurses, they really appreciate understanding who their patients are and what's important to them too.
I'm glad you mentioned that. And that sort of leads me to a burning question, is sort of, what is the appetite, for lack of a better word, on the other end, sort of from the nurses and the care team for care plans, end of life plans? Like, for instance, if my mother had sort of tucked a letter in my grandfather's pocket when he went in, or sort of given it to the admitting nurse, like, is that on a clipboard? Like, is that something that they're really looking at, or do they not have time or energy for that? Or like, so what sort of weight, what sort of I guess, respect are these end of life and comfort plans given to people?
Yeah, so advanced care plans, the ones that record your medical care wishes, are absolutely vital. Like it's something that all clinicians want their patients to have. And so they're very well respected. They're very well used in like hospital and ER and facility settings. You can bring them in informally as written wishes, and there's a number of different templates that you can use that are available to the public. There's also other ways to record your advanced care wishes. Hospitals, and it's different across different jurisdictions, but the health authorities in BC have a form called Most Medical Orders for Scope of Treatment. And so that's one of the ways that they record what your level of care is, the type of care that you want. And that goes on your record so that it's accessible no matter where you are in that hospital facility. They will know what your wishes are. So definitely having an advanced care plan is something that is like universally accepted. Creating a comfort plan is something that is a little bit more new, but I know that in hospitals and especially in hospice settings, like end of life settings, relationship is so important. There's the nurses and the physicians and the volunteers, they all have such deep compassion and desire to connect with their patients that anything that helps them make that connection is welcome. And certainly having a personal comfort plan is one of those things to help with that connection.
Okay, very good. Thank you. That perfectly answers my question. I'm sure there's other folks who might be listening who would have a similar question. So yeah, so advanced, just to recap, advanced care plans, sort of universally accepted, well received at sort of all levels of care, say in the hospital, and then comfort plans, perhaps better received at hospices and palliative care places and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've created a guide and a checklist. It's called My Personal Comfort Plan, to help people kind of think through like, well, what are their comfort options? Because we don't know what we don't know, especially some of the more creative comfort options that are available. So I've created this workbook that helps people understand what they might want for themselves, and then to make a record of that so they can carry it with them, no matter where they are, whether they're in their home and they've got home nursing coming in, that revolving door of home care aides that come in when you're getting home support. Each one of them you need to form relationship with. And so having My Personal Comfort Plan is a way for them to get to know you really quickly. And then same thing if you move into long-term care or a hospice facility, having My Personal Comfort Plan with you is a really quick and easy way to express what's important to you for your comfort.
That's excellent, and I'm really you have my admiration for creating such a business and offering such an important service. I think this is something that's very much overlooked and perhaps not often thought about, especially by those folks sort of in the 20s and 30s age bracket. So
Get her done.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's on my list now for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, and then so my next question, I guess, sort of bridging off the last one was, so I think to use the example of midwives, it's sort of a long road. It seemed, I don't know enough of the history, but it seemed like perhaps midwives, there was a period in sort of the Canadian medical system where maybe they weren't as accepted sort of as part of a medical team. I don't know, maybe like during the 1980s or something like that. And now it sort of seems like, midwives very much have a place sort of alongside nurses and maternity doctors sort of in a hospital setting on a maternity ward. Talk to us about sort of death doulas and end of life planners when it comes to sort of that culture. Are you like, are you do you spend a lot of time sort of bedside, like in palliative care units and with your clients?
Yeah, the parallel with birth midwives is a really interesting one. And like midwives are now regulated, and midwives actually have a clinical role as well as like a holistic support role.
Right.
So that's one difference between death doulas and birth midwives, is that death doulas don't have any clinical role to them. We're not prescribing or giving medication. We really focus on like more holistic and support side, like emotional, physical, and practical, pragmatic kinds of supports. And so, yeah, I like to say that death doulas, it's an ancient art and a new profession. So these death caring skills that doulas have, like how to hold space for big emotions and important and sometimes difficult conversations, how to vigil with people. So once active dying has started, how do we sit and be present and support the family and the person who is transitioning, and to bring them comfort. These are all things that doulas do. And yet death doulas are not, we're not a regulated profession yet, like midwives are. Same way that birth doulas, there's also birth doulas. They're not a regulated profession. Like they don't have like a college under the Health Professionals Act in Canada. And so, you know, that brings some challenges for us. We're in the process right now of, as a death caring, as a death doula movement, of trying to raise awareness of what death doulas have to offer and the ways that we can fill gaps in the system, and to both support practitioners that are already in the mainstream system. So how can we help nurses? How can we help physicians? How can we help spiritual advisors to shoulder some of that load of caring for people through end of life? And then also, how do we help the individuals themselves? How can we be of service to individuals and families? So it's really, we're at a point right now where we're really educating the community and the mainstream system and finding how we can fit into that space. Because as a doula, I've really seen the difference that it can make. It's really quite astounding, the supports that doulas can bring and how they can ease that journey for families.
Please talk to us more about that. And I just want to recant. I think I should have used birth doula instead. That's a much better comparison, I think, to midwife, because as you mentioned, I think midwives, they go to school for 4 years and there is very much a clinical aspect to it. But birth doulas, perhaps that's a little bit more comparable to it.
You weren't far off though. There is a history of death care providers calling themselves death midwives as well. So there is definitely a parallel there. Yeah, definitely.
I'm sure it's a fascinating history. So I'll look up a couple of books. And if you have a couple of books on sort of the history of death doulas and death midwives, I'd love to include that in the description as well.
Sure. Yeah. I'll think of some.
So, you know, it's sort of the last bit that you mentioned there was sort of how impactful it is, sort of the presence of a death doula. Talk to us a bit about that, maybe on a more personal perspective, if you don't mind, just sort of how it has changed you as a person. Has you had some great epiphanies, or is it just sort of you're very well suited to being an end of life planner, death doula, and you found it sort of just taking it in stride? What sort of personal impact has it had for you?
Yeah, well, you know, it's been interesting because I started CircleSpace in 2017, actually with a friend who's no longer part of CircleSpace, but they were really formative in kind of bringing this idea and of the necessity of end of life planning to me. And so at that time, I was just offering like the end of life planning and advanced care planning services. I wasn't doing more traditional death doula work with people who are actively dying. And it wasn't until my mom actually got sick. She was diagnosed with a glioblastoma brain tumor, and which progressed very quickly. And so I took on the role of not only being her daughter, but also using all of my death caring skills to support her and our family and our wider community through this very fast decline and death that took place over a period of 3 months. She chose to have an assisted death exactly 3 months after she was diagnosed. And so personally, I've seen how having someone who is really savvy and skilled at navigating the systems, because holy crow, is a lot thrown at you in a time of stress where it's really hard to process information. You suddenly have to be a really skilled advocate for yourself. You have to know what services to bring in, where to go for those services, what questions to ask. So that's a lot to ask a family to do in a time of stress. And so having a death doula to help navigate those different systems and services is incredibly helpful to make sure that you get the best care and support possible. Also, the number of, the different ways that we respond to grief and to illness. Every person has a different response. Some require more support than others. Some require more information. So having someone in your team, in your community, that can help hold space and validate and just allow people to express what do they need to express around what's going on, is so key as well. We call this like this concept of holding space. It sounds kind of flaky, but it's actually a really powerful thing to just let people experience what they need to experience without judgment, and to express those emotions so that they're not all bottled up and causing toxicity and conflict. So that's a really, really big key. And then also just helping people to understand like what might be around the corner. Like, what does this dying process look like? What can they expect in terms of physical changes, as death approaches? Some of those things can be really disconcerting. Like there's changes in breathing that happen with folks where it can sound like they're struggling to breathe. It can be quite a loud rattling sound. And actually, most times the person is not in discomfort at all. It's just a natural transition that is happening. And so to be with family members to say like, this is normal, take some deep breaths, be present, hold their hand. This is what their body is supposed to be doing as they are dying. To just kind of slow things down and offer that reassurance is so important. Because a lot of the time, nurses are too busy doing their other really important jobs, like focusing on the clinical support, and physicians as well. So to have somebody who's just there along for the journey with you, who knows what that journey is like, can bring incredible comfort and reassurance to families.
Took me a while to think of the word, but I'm in awe. That is the word of sort of what you do and why you do it and how you do it and the gap that you fill. I mean, I can't believe this isn't really a regular course of sort of like, you know what I mean? Like, is this in the mainstream yet? Like, I think everybody needs to have an end of life planner. I think that's as important as a lawyer or a funeral sort of service provider or a doctor, or it just seems like it's right up there. So what is sort of, have you noticed since you started in 2017, has there been a slow, gradual, or perhaps even a faster shift towards sort of end of life planners being an accepted, necessary part of an end of life team?
Yeah. First of all, I want to say I'm so glad I've convinced you. I totally agree with what you're saying about everyone should have access to this kind of support. And it's definitely slow going. I think, like I said before, the pandemic has really created public interest in these realities of death and dying and illness. And so certainly I'm talking with more people than I ever have before about these topics. So I think the public is really driving the interest right now. And there's lots of efforts to find those inroads into the mainstream system, but it's definitely slow going. I can tell you what one of my dreams is around this. And for me, like, I think having like a really defined scope of practice and quality care for doulas is important, so that we can have that element of consumer protection, for lack of a better word, so that people know what they're going to get every time they approach a doula. It makes it easier for them to find that support when they know that there's going to be quality care. So working towards that is really important. What I would also like to see is like in extended benefits insurance companies, including doulas, because I think we're always going to be a community-based service, like a fee-for-use private practitioner service. In the same way that other integrative health professionals and supports are, like counselors and naturopaths and acupuncturists, that kind of sector. So I think having extended health benefits coverage would really help to increase accessibility for families. Because right now they have to pay out of pocket for doula support. And yes, every doula that I know offers pro bono and reduced or flexible rates, because accessibility is really key for us, especially for vulnerable or marginalized people. It's really important that we can offer our supports without there being barriers. But I'd also like to see some partnerships with hospice. Like having doulas on team at hospices just seems like such a natural fit for me. And then also with like cancer agencies, it just, you don't have to have a confirmed terminal diagnosis to benefit from having a death doula. We are available to help folks who are healthy, to help folks who have a serious illness, to help folks who have a terminal illness, and to help folks who are actively dying. And so I think there are these entry points where, you get a certain diagnosis, then here's your doula. And I think that's really the way to do it. So to find those ways to integrate with the mainstream system, and then also to be available on a community level, is how we're going to kind of get this culture shift going.
Absolutely. And I think that definitely needs to happen sooner rather than later. I just can't believe it's 2021. And like, this sounds like this should have all been in place 20, 30 years ago. So,
well, what's so interesting is that these are all skills that we used to have within our families and within our communities, like before, right. Industrialization, before the funeral industry kind of came in. And so when that happened, and the medicalization of death, like these used to be things that death used to happen in the home. It used to be something that was visible. I mean, it'd be hard to find somebody these days who's actually been with someone who is dying. It's not the norm, whereas it was in our history. And so we're kind of coming full circle now. We've seen what happens when we completely remove death from the family and from the community, when we offer it up to and make it the realm of experts. We've seen that, yes, there's good things that come with medical advancements and that kind of support, but there's also things that are lost when death is not a part of the family and the community. And so death doulas are helping to kind of bring that back full circle, to integrate the positives of all of those things, of community death care, and also the advancements around the medical system and more formalized end of life supports.
Again, I see a parallel between birth and death in this case, where yes, we have more home births these days, right? And birth doulas taking a place, and more people sort of bringing childbirth back into the sort of the home realm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. There's a parallel there. You're right with that. There's some people say birth is not a medical event, and some people say death is not a medical event. And that's not true all the time. Sometimes, you do need those supports, but the key is choice. The key is being able to make decisions that are based in your values and what's right for you and what's safe, and to just have those options.
Absolutely. So you sort of touched on it earlier when I don't the exact wording that you used, but sort of a push for standardization perhaps within the industry so that it does become more generally accepted. And you mentioned sort of so consumers feel protected, and there's perhaps maybe a greater sense of legitimacy. So is there, I guess, a two-part question, is there a governing body for end-of-life planners, death doulas in Canada or in North America? And then the second question, if not them, then who is pushing for standardization or sort of,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, any push in that direction is really coming from communities of death doulas themselves. And so there's no governing body right now, but there are different networks that are creating their own kinds of scope of practice and trying to kind of ensure that this is it's on a professional level. So it's really just all doula community work that's happening right now. And it's like, I have to say, there's definitely not consensus within the death caring and doula community around regulation and standardization. Some folks feel that, because this is an ancient and sacred and creative art, that doesn't lend itself very well to regulation, because when you have regulation, like we see certain things are lost because you can't quantify or standardize or fit into the mold the type of work that the way that some doulas work with some of their spiritual support. So definitely there's some folks that don't support regulation. And then there are others that do. So I think as a community member who's seeking out a doula, it's really up to you to find which fit is best for you. Like, are you wanting someone who isn't as interested in regulation, who maybe offers some more sacred or spiritual or creative approaches? Or are you wanting someone who operates in a more traditional professional kind of a capacity? And so I just have to say, it's a huge conversation right now in the death care community around regulation and what's going to happen. And there's different forces kind of working towards each.
And I really respect that. I actually, I can see sort of in my own demise how it would be interesting to have sort of more of a shamanic, almost spiritual aspect to it. But then at the same time, I appreciate sort of, I can understand for the system, with insurance and things like that, having sort of someone with a professional designation, sort of overseeing my own end of life care or something like that. So yeah, I think there's probably a place for both. And I hope either way, I hope it works out for you and everyone else in the profession, because I think this does need to be a regular part of the quote unquote system. And I think, to be included for folks in insurance plans or extended benefits, I think that's really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And the key, because trust and fit of approach and personality and character is so important in this. Personal referrals is really key. So most of the folks that come to me know me either through a referral from a previous client, or they've attended one of my workshops, or they've been following me on social media. So they get a really good sense of my flavor of who I am as a person. And so that relationship is really important. So I think for, any of your listeners, if you're kind of impassioned in the same way that Adrian is now over this, what's really important is sharing, because people don't know that doulas exist. That's our biggest barrier. There's so many fabulous and skilled and professional doulas out there. And so just talking about it with your family, exploring what you would want around end of life, is to start having these conversations, is really the best thing that we can do for everybody in our community.
For those folks interested in pursuing this as a profession, what sort of options are there? Are there courses out there, or is there a certification or something?
Yeah, there's so many courses. And so there's no one course that's required, because it's not a regulated field. So really what I say to folks that are interested in exploring becoming a death doula is for them first to do their own work. Absolutely, you have to do the work that you will be asking your clients to do yourself in order to be in integrity with yourself and your profession. So you got to do your own advanced care plan. You got to get your will done. You have to spend a lot of time really thinking about, well, what are your values and beliefs and experiences around illness, dying, and death? So take some time to just do that work on yourself. And then in terms of courses, there's a course for every different person. So if you're more interested in the spiritual support aspect of death doulaing, then there's a course that kind of focuses on that. If you're more interested in supporting communities that are traditionally underserved, and you're really interested in racial justice and supporting queer communities, there's a doula training around that. If you're really interested in leading advanced care planning, you're focused more on system navigation and getting the paperwork done, there's a death doula training for that. So it's kind of like figuring out what you want your professional doula identity to be. How do you want to be of service? And then picking a course that best fills those gaps.
I can see the dam is about to break here, which is good. It sounds like there's just so much sort of happening in the background that sort of folks outside of that field are just like myself are unaware of. So I think that sounds really promising. I'll include some links for perhaps some courses out there, just to sort of a range of different options out there. Mm-hmm. Are there some that you would recommend here in British Columbia, or not necessarily recommend, but point someone to here in British Columbia?
Yeah, we're so lucky. One of the benefits of the pandemic is that everything has moved online. And so we now have access to trainings from around the world.
Right.
And the one that I came across that I'm really, really interested in and keen on is by a death doula out of LA. Her name is Alua Arthur. And she really is a leader in this field. She's a lawyer and an end-of-life planner and a death doula. So she's got such a range of experience and wisdom. And so she has a death doula online training that's also grounded in like ethical responsibility and social justice. So looking at how, as death doulas, we can not only serve, the population, but how do we also help to advance health equity? Like, how do we help ensure that we're offering these services in a safe and equitable way to everybody, especially those that are traditionally marginalized or harmed by the mainstream healthcare system. So it's just this beautiful blend of awareness and education and pragmatic training and spirituality, and it's just a really lovely combination.
Well, that sounds fantastic. I'll make sure to include a link for that. Yeah, no, thanks for sharing. And of course, though, I do want to also give this as a platform for you to plug CircleSpace, because I think you have created such a just from speaking with you and looking at your website, I really feel like the authenticity and sort of the value here. And so please plug CircleSpace. Where do folks find you? And what else can you tell us about any final comments on CircleSpace?
Sure, thanks so much. Yeah, so my website is circlespace.ca, and I've got an online store where you can purchase my personal comfort plan. And I also have a number of free educational resources around end-of-life planning, and about what death doulas can offer as well, and some videos on my website. So definitely check it out if you kind of want to go down that rabbit hole of learning more about doulas and starting around your end-of-life planning, or if you need death doula support. I'm on Facebook and Instagram, CircleSpace Community as well. And yeah, I'm like, one important thing to note is that I'm doing an MA in clinical counseling right now. So I'm a student, and my focus is going to be on children's grief and bereavement, and also supporting families through medical assistance in dying. So those are kind of the areas I really love. I have a passion for working and supporting all families and all individuals, and supporting families with children is a really big passion for me as well. And so this MA in clinical counseling is going to help me do that even better, and to really widen the ways that I can offer support. So that's where I'm at right now.
I'm honored to have had you as a guest, Chelsea. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much for inviting this topic and this conversation.